Hello, Tom.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Question, when we get later in the meeting, I figured this would be an easy way to bring it up here. Do you think it would be easier when we start to go on this tour of the facilities to have people meet behind town hall and carpool into a few cars rather than
That's a really good idea.
try to have 20 cars go and park up by Round Pond?
There he is. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm good. If you don't know him already, meet Tom Kehoe.
Hey, Tom.
How are you, Scott? I think
I saw you at the
met
first
you,
meeting. Yeah, I
through
think
the
we've.
planning board.
Okay.
So many years ago.
Neither one of us has aged a day. That's the good.
Yeah,
news.
Tom has held every position in Manchester that I can think of.
How you doing? All right?
I'm doing well. I just got off the phone with Sue Brown. I had called her yesterday, the day before, so we just had a nice little update on what she's doing. So,
Good.
and I also had a good conversation. Remind me your DPW director assistant.
Chuck Dam,
Yeah, and what's the other guy's name?
Nate DeRochers.
What's his first name?
Nate.
Nate. Yeah, I spoke with Nate. Thank you.
Yeah.
He was really helpful. He gave me a good update on some things. Haven't changed a lot since 1990, but some have changed a lot. I found out. So
We're certainly putting a lot more money into water and sewer infrastructure now that we didn't have before. When I was first on the board, it was kind of like, okay, let's balance the budget. Now, how much is left to think that we could use for infrastructure?
Right.
And then my last few years on the board of selectmen, it was kind of like, okay, let's start off with what we need to do and then figure out how to pay for it.
Yep. I hear you.
Yeah, Nate and Chuck make a good team because you've got a real great water guy with tremendous knowledge and an engineering background, and Nate is a kind of working the projects along and making sure things are going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
No, they seem really well informed.
I'm getting all kinds of low system resource warnings on my computer, so I'm closing things frantically.
I will be right back, gentlemen.
Well, we have a co-host. That might be Sue Croft, or it might be Sue Brown. Yeah, that's better. It's Sue Brown. Scott Horsley said he was just talking to you.
He was. And can you hear me?
You're loud and clear.
Loud and
Okay.
clear.
Perfect. I'm going to mute and just run a quick errand, but I'm here.
Yeah, we call that walking the dog. I'm going to go make my last coffee of the day. I'll be right back.
So it
You know,
is,
Scott, I neglected to
Yeah.
ask you for a biography so I could give you a laudatory introduction. Here.
you don't need to do that, Steve. That's fine. You can,
I'll just say you've been around forever and you know.
been around
everything.
forever.
Yep.
Yep.
Old as water.
That's right. He's as old as water. He knows everything about water on the ground,
kicking.
water under the ground, water in the sky.
Um, Is it as nice up there today as it is down here on Cape Cod?
Yeah, it wasn't this morning. It was really cloudy and cold and damp this
Oh,
morning.
is that right?
Had some showers
Oh, wow.
overnight. But yeah, it's beautiful now. It's probably,
Yeah.
it's bright, sunny, beautiful
Yeah.
blue sky, and
Yeah, it's
temperature's
gorgeous.
probably, I'd say the temperature's probably right around 50.
Yep, same here.
28.2 here.
Wow, that's great.
This time of the year with that cold ocean there, it doesn't, you don't get too many of those beautiful days. You don't like the sea breeze in the spring, but boy, you certainly like it in the summer.
Right,
Oh,
oh
it's
yeah, no,
There's
definitely.
a racing kayak going out at the moment, wearing gloves, beanie, wetsuit. He was ready.
Hey, Steve, how late does the meeting run?
Oh, we usually wind up by 7:30 or 8.
Now, I know that's a joke.
Well, you may be winding up by 7:30 or 8.
Yes. We aim for an hour and, you know, we allow ourselves 10 or 15
Okay.
minutes excess if we need it.
I do have a 5:30 water commissioners meeting. I'm actually a water commissioner in my town here.
Oh, good.
So I told him I might be a minute or two late, but I'd like to see if I can jump pretty much on 5:30 if
that-
that's possible.
We'll make that possible. We might be debating how to get people to fill out a survey, but we don't need your
Okay.
help on that.
Okay,
Maybe we'll offer, you know, an hour of free professional consulting by Scott Horsley.
that's fine.
That would work.
That's fine. Yeah, I think my presentation will be 20 to 25 minutes, if that's okay.
It
then we
is. Let
can
me just make sure you
Q&A.
can share the screen.
Yep.
All right. Who can share? All participants. Good.
That looks like it's working. I won't put it up there yet. but-
Hi, Sue Croft.
Hi, sorry,
right.
I'm trying to figure out how to change my name here. Apparently I was logged in before as Manchester by the Sea 1.
Can change your name.
I will change. Oh, you want me? You're gonna do it? Thank you.
Yeah, how's that?
I'll take it. I might remind people of that though.
That's probably over promising slightly.
You think?
Yeah, that's better.
Almost.
You're
Therefore,
funny.
you have your choice. Someone asks a question, you can say, that's one of the things I'm not in charge of.
Hopefully there's a few of them.
Okay, there you go. You can just be Sue.
All right. I'll take it.
They're rushing the gates. Good.
Good afternoon.
Hello, Peter.
Hi, Steve.
Hello, Jeff. Welcome.
I should walk down and see you down there sometime.
Hmm. Yes, please. Someone is joining us mysteriously known as RP. RP.
Ron Parker?
Ah, thank you. I was getting there. Well, it's 4:30 and 10 seconds, and I declare we have a quorum. So let's begin. Sue, I'm going to make sure you're a co-host so that you can let people in.
Sounds good.
You are a co-host already. Congratulations.
Yay. You must have done that when you were messing around with my name.
No, I think you came in as a Manchester something or other. A high monkey muck. All right, so I'll call to order this meeting of the Task Force on Water Resources for Manchester under the auspices of the Board of Select People. This is our third official meeting, and our first task is to welcome members and any guests who are attending. I see a good turnout of members. And I guess some evidence that we're still a well-kept secret. But we'll be talking about a survey and some publicity to maybe change that with the rest of our fellow citizens. But our primary objective today is to hear from an expert, not only in his field, but in our town and its resources. So shall I proceed directly to that? I'm looking for, there, no, I'm looking for the agenda, which I had queued up, but there it is. So after the welcome, I will introduce Scott Horsley. And, Scott had said he needed no introduction, but I actually found some information which I have now misplaced. There it is. So Scott, I'm going to read a paragraph off your Tufts biography, if that's all right.
Sure.
Scott Horsley is a consulting hydrologist, business owner, educator, and inventor. He received a BS in biology from Southeastern Massachusetts University and an MA in geology and marine affairs from the University of Rhode Island. He is president and CEO at Horsley and Witten, Inc., a consulting firm based in Sandwich, Mass., which works through the US and abroad for both public and private clients. Scott has more than 20 years of professional experience in water resource science and management. Specific areas of interest and research include delineation methods for critical water resource protection areas, carrying capacity analysis of watersheds, and innovative water management strategies. He has worked with federal, state, and local government agencies, as well as private industries throughout the United States, Bulgaria, Nicaragua, China, Brazil, and the Bahamas. Scott currently serves as a principal instructor on a nationwide series of US EPA training workshops on watershed management. The EPA has given him the Environmental Innovator Award for his work in constructed wetlands and stormwater treatment. So it's a great pleasure to welcome him. We know him as the author of that seminal report in 1990. Some of you were present at the creation of that in Manchester on our water resources, and I think that's going to be part of his subject matter, but I'll let Scott unfold it. Take it away, Scott.
Well, thanks, Steve, and thanks for the invitation. I guess point number one is I need to update my resume at Tufts, you've taught me, because I now have more than 30 years experience, and I'm no longer with Horsley and Witten, Inc. I'm now on my own. As I call it, I graduated from the firm a couple of years ago. I decided that I had enough running a business and wanted to get back into actually consulting with my favorite clients. So I'm continuing to do work for, what's that?
I said that also explains why the Tufts website has a picture of your younger brother.
Yes, exactly. So thank you for pointing that out. In any case, I'm still working with EPA on a number of projects, Nature Conservancy, a number of nonprofit organizations, including the Manchester Essex Conservation Trust, the Nature Conservancy, and others. I am currently still teaching adjunct at Tufts and Harvard now as well, where I teach graduate level water resources classes. So that's the only update. And Steve, thank you for pointing out my need to get in there and update. So I have a slideshow that'll take about 15 or 20 minutes, and you can stop me along the way with clarifying questions. And Steve asked me to kind of present the 1990 report, which I will do, but I thought it was worth preceding that with 4 or 5 or 6 slides to make sure that we're all on the same page with some terminology that I'm going to be using. So I've got a few slides that I actually use in my courses to kind of orient some things. I'll just mention at the beginning, this is really exciting for me to re-engage with the town of Manchester by the Sea. I worked here quite a long time ago, not only on this report, but with John Witten, my former business partner, working with the town, sort of serving the role of town planner at that point. And so it's really exciting to be back involved here, and appreciate, again, the invitation, Steve. So thank you. So let me jump in here. And again, please stop me along the way. If I have something up here that needs clarification, and I'm sure we'll have time to do some general Q&A at the end. So first of all, this subject matter eventually is going to lead to what do we do to protect our water? But my strong belief is before we can have that conversation in a meaningful manner, we really need to understand some basics. And the basics are geology, soils, and hydrology. I'll try to keep this pretty non-technical, but again, try to provide the basics. Real briefly, at the top middle of the slide is a superficial geologic profile or cross-section or block diagram, I guess is the right term. I'm going to be showing you one of Manchester a little later, so we can talk details then. That's always my starting point, literally, on any project I get involved in. What's the geology? Because that really drives a lot of other things. On the lower left is a water table map. And these are elevations of the groundwater, not the land surface. We're all used to looking at surface topography maps when we do hiking and whatnot, or looking at a site plan. And a surface elevation map can tell us which way drainage or surface water runs across the land. But this map you're looking at here in the lower left is actually a map of the water table, which is the upper surface of the groundwater. So similar to understanding how surface water moves if we have a water table map. And again, I will show you one of Manchester later. We can then predict quite accurately, I might add, groundwater flow directions. You can see these arrows. Groundwater moves perpendicular and down gradient, much like surface water across the land topography. Generally speaking, groundwater directions mimic surface topography, but not always. So maybe we may end up talking a little bit about that. And then on the bottom right is a soil profile, and this really focuses on what's going on in the shallower depths. And I won't get too much into that today, but that can be important if we're talking about things like fertilization of surfaces or agriculture, which I know you don't have a lot of, but certainly in some cases that can be an important thing to be focused on. So a little bit more on groundwater. Let me define it because it's commonly misdefined. Groundwater is water that occurs in the subsurface in a saturated state. So you can see in this blow up over on the right here, all the sand grains in this case are saturated completely with water, groundwater. Up above that in the shallower soils, you can see from this blow up, we have sand grains. We have some water clinging to the particles, but we also have air pockets. So that would not be considered groundwater. If you wanted to call that something, you might call it water in the ground, or you might call it soil moisture, but not groundwater. The upper surface of the groundwater system is what we call the water table. So I was just referring to a water table map, which would be the elevations at this level. And then also in this picture, of course, is a very simple well. You can dig down or bore down pretty much anywhere, and you will, at some depth, you encounter groundwater in the water table. So probably one of the most important things to know about groundwater is that it moves very slowly, especially compared to surface water. So a fast groundwater flow rate is about 1 foot per day. Just take a second and think about that. If I'm sitting in a room right now that's about 20 feet, 25 feet in length, it would take a month, almost a month, for the groundwater to flow beneath me in this room. And I think that's is an important thing to really keep in mind as we start talking about connections between things at the land surface and so-called receiving waters. The other part of this slide is groundwater moves from high, generally speaking, there are some exceptions, but higher elevations, or more appropriately said, higher heads or higher pressure areas, which is generally higher elevations, to lower elevations. So in this case, we have a hill here shown in the profile, and we call that a recharge area. That's where that's where precipitation enters the subsurface and gets into the groundwater, that process being referred to as recharge. Then it becomes groundwater, and it flows as these flow lines show, and ultimately discharges to either a stream, a pond, a wetland, or the ocean. Now, I showed this slide years ago at an EPA conference, I think out in California, and somebody stood up and said, excuse me, Mr. Horsley, you're doing a great presentation, but you got something wrong on this slide because water doesn't move uphill. Now, being a nice guy, I took his question offline during break and told him that he was completely wrong. In fact, groundwater moves up almost as frequently as it does down. So I want to be clear that this slide is accurate, that groundwater does. And so the one way to think about this is, and we've all done this as kids, I think, with a sibling. You get the garden hose, you fill it up with water, your brother or your sister is holding the other end, and you lift one part up and the other one lower and try to fill up the hose, and it will come out the lower. So, and the hose can be drooping, right? So it's up here, I'll put my hand, comes out here, and the hose can go down and back up. And that's exactly what's going on here. The reason that, and the garden hose proves me that I'm right. The water will do that if it's under the right pressure. So this is what happens all the time. Going back to the travel times here, you can see that the so-called residence time, how long groundwater stays in the subsurface before it appears in, let's say, Sawmill Brook or something, could be days, years, decades, maybe even centuries. In this area, I would guess it's most commonly up to decades in your watersheds that we'll talk about a little bit later. But nonetheless, it's a long time compared to surface water flow. And here is a hydrologic budget. I don't know that we have one for Manchester yet, but we might be a good idea. We can put that on the list of things that we might want to do. This is for the Charles River, which has had a tremendous amount of work done. And I would suggest that these numbers are probably somewhat representative for Manchester. So let's just look at them. I don't know what your rainfall rate is, probably closer to 45 inches per year. Does that sound about right? Anybody know? 45 maybe inches per year. So this is roughly 42. And of course, that's changing. It's increasing. But let's say 42 inches per year in Boston area. Interestingly, almost half of that returns to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration. That leaves what we call net precipitation, 42 minus 15. And that net precipitation ends up doing one of two things. It either flows across the surface of the land. Here we see surface runoff. That's about 10 inches per year of the 42, about a quarter. And then the other 17 gets into the ground, infiltrates, and most of it recharges. So, and then as you can see, the groundwater, as I showed in that other slide, makes its way to a surface water body, in this case, the Charles River. This information can be quite valuable, especially for water suppliers, just to understand, sources and what things called the safe yield, how much groundwater is there, how much can be taken. So a water budget like this can be quite helpful, and maybe we'll come back to this later. And when we have development, the hydrologic budget gets altered. And this is a really important point here as we talk about, future development and potential stressors on the water supply system. And generally what happens with development is we create impervious surfaces, rooftops, roads, parking lots, etc. And as you can imagine, when we create let's picture a big shopping mall, and let's say that site before they built the shopping mall was forested in its natural condition. Well, when you put down let's say 5 or 10 acre piece of asphalt, you don't have a lot of water getting into the ground. You've essentially sealed that off. So your infiltration, as it's shown here, decreases. And what you're doing is you're changing that to more surface runoff. So one of the things that we'll probably talk about is stormwater. Stormwater is, the two big issues, water quality issues, are typically related to either surface runoff stormwater, which is called stormwater, or wastewater, and we'll talk more about that later as well. So generally speaking, this is what happens in a post-development condition. If one applies things like low impact development or green infrastructure, we can mitigate this problem of more runoff, more stormwater. There are some really effective techniques to do that. And if we have time, we can get into a little bit of that later. Just a couple more slides. The relationship between groundwater and surface water, which is really important in this in your town here to understand. Most streams in Massachusetts, and I think it's true in Manchester, are what we call gaining streams, and this means groundwater is discharging to the streams. This is what creates or supports what we call a perennial stream. You'll notice when, for example, Sawmill Brook flows during periods of fairly long no rain periods or droughts. And the way it's able to do that is because groundwater is constantly discharging into the stream bed and maintaining that flow. So this is a really important relationship. And when we review development projects, one of the things we want to be mindful of is how are we changing this dynamic? How are we changing the groundwater on the site, how it might affect a stream flow or hydrology of the stream. It is possible in some areas, some parts of the world, not so much around here, but there are some where we have what we call losing streams, where the stream is up above the groundwater system and it actually leaks down into the groundwater. So that is a possibility, but in Manchester's case, I believe that most of the streams are probably gaining streams. And then also highly relevant to Manchester is if you put a well in, a pumping well near a stream, you can change the hydrology pretty significantly. So in the upper picture, we have the natural condition, groundwater discharging to the stream, providing that so-called base flow. And then we have two conditions on the bottom with different pumping rates. Q1 or B, the middle one, shows a well that's pumping, let's say, at a lower rate. It is robbing some water from the stream, meaning that water this pump can't get to the stream, so it results in a depleted stream flow. And then in the bottom picture, C, the well's pumped at a higher rate, and not only are we taking water that would have gone to the stream, but now we are actually pulling water back from the stream into the groundwater. And we believe that this is the case, at least sometimes, with the Lincoln Street well in Manchester, and I'll show you a picture of that later. So now let's move into, most of these other graphics are from the report. I think, I don't know if I said this at the beginning, but I did have a very good conversation with Nate DeRochers, and Nate, I think you're on here, so thank you again for updating me. And one of the interesting things I learned is, but I already knew this, but I learned it again, that is that some things change and some don't. So I think a lot of this information is still relevant, and that feels good, but some of it obviously needs to be updated. So the watershed map is, watershed, I should define that. This is defined by surface water hydrology. So these are land areas that drain to various water bodies. And we can see as part of our report, in fact, figure 1 back in 1990, we delineated the watersheds to all of these various receiving waters. You can see Gravelly Pond on the upper left. You can see the Lincoln Street well, and Manchester Harbor together in the middle, and so forth. So again, this is where surface water would drain to these features. It's, as I said before, this is somewhat representative of groundwater conditions, but not exactly the same. And we don't have as much, we don't have nearly as much water table information as we do surface topography. So that's where we have to make some informed interpolations with groundwater flow. I left this slide, kept this slide in here because I thought this was interesting, and I think this still holds true. Worth thinking about. If we just focus on the round pond, gravelly pond upper part here, because that's obviously part of your drinking water supply. Most of the watershed is in other towns, I believe Hamilton primarily. So, and you can see that's true of all of these watersheds to varying degrees. So I think that point worth noting is that whatever you do for water resources protection in Manchester by the Sea, you're going to want to maintain good neighborly contacts with Hamilton and any other community that might be in the watershed, because they're going to play an important role in helping you protect water. So that's I think an important point to keep in mind as we go forward here. So here is the water table map associated with the Lincoln Street well and the groundwater system, and I'll just spend a minute on this. The well is located right down in this area here, and these contour lines represent the water table elevation relative to mean sea level. So, and you can see these are plotted on a land topographic map. So as an example, I'm trying to find a place I can read this. Maybe if this is the 50-foot contour right here, you can see that the groundwater is 20. So that would suggest that the groundwater is at about a 30-foot depth at that location. If I'm reading the right surface elevation, I can't be sure, but I think I see a number 50 there. Actually, I'm sorry, well, I'm not sure. I see 125. Does anybody know the elevations? I can't really tell, but I'm guessing that's a 50. It's cut off. This is a 100-foot elevation here. So that makes sense. That's probably a 50-foot elevation. Water table's at 22. So we could interpolate that the depth of water, depth of groundwater along this, in this area, or at that point right there, is probably around 30 feet. And the more importantly, what this water table map shows us, you can see we have contours running sort of northeast, southwest, and groundwater flow would be perpendicular from northwest to southeast towards the well. You can see that we've also got some contours up in this area. And this suggests that groundwater, it looks like there's a divide up here. Groundwater may be heading off more to the north here. So somewhere in here, we have what we call a groundwater divide with water, some water moving to the north and some water moving to the south. I would say that given the level of information here, and these little triangles represent places that we made measurements back in 1990, that this is an area that might be a good idea to firm up, because I'm not sure that there's a lot of detailed information here. And this is something that we could talk more about. So I'll keep going and we can come back to this. Now this is the Lincoln Street well. And this is an interesting situation and a little bit unique compared to other towns in the Commonwealth. This is the production well right here. Actually, and the bottom of this well, or these wells, it's kind of darkened or hatched, is the intake to the wells, or what we call the screen. So this is where the water is being drawn from. And you can see it's being drawn from this sand and gravel layer here. This, by the way, I think this is maybe this, I should say, this is a cross section. We're looking sideways through the subsurface. Is Sawmill Brook right here. And so the groundwater is being pulled from the sand and gravel layer, and in the area of the Lincoln Street well, it's overlain by clay. Now, clay is very low permeability. Not much water moves through it. So we call that a confining layer. And what it does is it kind of keeps the water beneath it under some pressure, but also reduces the amount of water and contaminants, I might add, that might move through this. So most of the water from the Lincoln Street well is actually coming from this area over here, where the sand and gravel appears at the land surface. So this would be what we call the primary recharge area, because the recharge rate, the amount of precipitation that gets into groundwater in sand and gravel, is much higher than what would fall in this clay area. So this is where most of the water is coming from that gets to the well. There is also some induced infiltration, as I mentioned earlier, from Sawmill Brook. So some of this water from Sawmill Brook is being pulled through this clay down into the well under pumping conditions. So it's kind of an interesting and a little bit unique situation. I guess the bottom line, what I would say is this well is getting water from two different places. The aquifer, and by the way, aquifer just refers to a geologic deposit like sand and gravel that transmits groundwater. So as I've said, this well is getting some of its water, I think most of its water, from the sand and gravel, but also some from the surface water, Sawmill Brook. So there are two different protection areas that we need to be concerned with, and I'll show those on a map. In fact, here we go. So this is the so-called Zone 2 area, protection area for the Lincoln Street well. And the definition of Zone 2, this is actually a Mass DEP term, Mass Department of Environmental Protection term. We have a 3-step system in Massachusetts to protect drinking water. Zone 1, that's not shown on the map, is a simple 400-foot radius around the well. Zone 2 is defined by a groundwater model, which we ran here to come up with this map. And Zone 2 is defined as that part of the aquifer that flows to the well under pumping conditions. And I should add, with some conservative pumping assumptions, like maximum pumping rate, no recharge for 180 days, drought conditions, which would make the well reach out to a larger area. So this is a sort of on purpose, overly protected area as a zone 2. What is not shown here is the zone 3, which is the watershed area that's upstream of this that also contributes to the well. And I believe I have a slide of that coming up. Not quite yet, but we'll get there. So this is actually from the town's GIS website, which is quite good, I might add. I think, I can't remember if they got this from the town website or maybe Mass GIS. I looked at both. In any case, excuse me, here's the well again. In fact, this shows, if you can see that circle, that's the 400-foot radius. So the well would be sort of the bullseye there of that circle. This line, and by the way, I'm colorblind, so I'm always careful. So I don't know what color that is, but that line that I'm tracing, I would guess blue, is the zone 2 line that I just showed you. And then we have, this is overlaying on this official geology map. So this color here, which I would guess is like an orangey color, but I could be wrong, is sand and gravel. And this color is actually the clay layers that I referred to earlier that overlie. The sand and gravel actually runs, as you saw in that cross section, beneath this clay. So that's kind of like, and I should mention all of the other areas that are not colored here are what we call glacial till, T-I-L-L. And glacial till is medium permeability. So maybe to kind of put stuff in order here, sand and gravel is highly permeable. That's where water will go fast, at like a foot per day, as I mentioned earlier. The glacial till would be the moderate to slow transmission area, and that might flow at a rate of maybe 1 foot per week to 1 foot per month. And then as you get into the clay, that's going to be like 1 foot per month to a lot lower, depending on the clay. So almost insignificant amount of flow in the clay. So you've got 3 different deposits all within your watershed. And the important thing is just to understand, which ones might be contributing the most water. The other thing I'd mention showing this slide, because I'm thinking about not only the past, but the future here. Notice that this boundary of the zone 2 kind of ends right here, but it shows that there's plenty of this permeable sand and gravel beyond it. And it may be that some of this area out here actually is in fact contributing, because this model was done 30 years ago and using best available information then. So this might be something that at some point the town may want to update with some more field information as it becomes available. And just a couple of other graphics from the report. This is one interesting thing. When I got on the phone with Nate, I mentioned to him that back then, from 1981 to 89, the average pumping was 22 million gallons per month. And what he told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nate, I think you're on here, that is still pretty current, that the average pumping is in that same vicinity. So that's interesting that it's been that stable for that long. The other observation here to recognize is that I'm talking average numbers. You can see that it varies quite a bit summer to winter. And I'll just mention that typically a part of that is more population in the summer, perhaps. But the other big variable, and I would suspect this is a bigger driver, is irrigation. Primarily lawn irrigation. I know down here where I live on Cape Cod, our summer pumping goes up dramatically for both of those 2 reasons I just mentioned. But during the summer, our assessment is that 50% of what we're pumping is going onto lawns, not into people's homes. So if you are in a situation, as are we, with we're up against our limit as to how much water we can pump, and we have concerns about that. One place to think about managing would be irrigation water, and we can talk more about that later too. I do see somebody in the chat. Is there a question, or should I just keep going? Steve, I can't look at the chat, so I'll keep
take a look.
going. Okay, actually, let me just see. Shingle Hill Place is glacial till, not bedrock. That is correct. Yes. Yes, it's glacial till underlain by bedrock. I think there's also some outcrops of ledge or bedrock there as well, but primarily I think that's correct that Shingle Hill is glacial till. Here's the monthly yield from Gravelly Pond. Again, fluctuation about 12,000 gallons per month. I think that has also been pretty stable. And then just a couple slides on our water quality. This is showing two different parameters, the sodium and chlorides. The sodium is the darker, the filled in circles here on the bottom. There is a drinking water guideline at 20 parts per million under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Above, if you exceed that, it's not necessarily an acute public health matter, but according to EPA, this is an area where potentially some advising of the public that might be on salt restricted diets. From speaking with Nate, my understanding is that since then there have been some even higher concentrations of sodium in some of the wells. So this might be something to flag as for further investigation as well. I know that the supply, the Lincoln Street well is south and down gradient of Route 128, which I'm going to guess is one of your major road salting areas. So that is one potential source of this. And it is something that can be managed going forward. In that case would require some collaboration with the state DOT, of course. And this might be my last slide. And this is really good news. Your nitrogen levels are very low. And again, from speaking with Nate, just to update this, my understanding, this has continued to present. You're essentially below, I think he said you're below 1 milligram per liter most recently. The drinking water standard for nitrate nitrogen is 10, and at the top of the graph here. And I can tell you there are many supplies around the state that are bumping up against that 10 or at least halfway there. So you're in very good shape here. I suspect one of the reasons for that is a significant portion of your zone 2 area and your watershed is on the town sewer. You don't have on-site septic systems, or I should say you don't have a lot of on-site septic systems. Again, that's just my quick guess as to what might be controlling this, but this is good news. I should also add, not only is there a drinking water standard for nitrates, but it's also considered an indicator of other sewage-based pollutants. And one of the things that everybody's talking about these days, and I know you guys have been looking at, are these PFAS compounds, which of course is a very low standard for. And there is some thinking that they can come from domestic wastewater because some of the products that these root from are things like that we have in our home, cookware, and some other sort of products that we believe that people are believing is a source in addition to the more conventional industrial sources or firefighting sources. So nitrate is an indicator of other pollutants. So what this is suggesting is that, again, you're in pretty good shape here, not only for nitrates, but probably for other sewage-derived pollutants. The indication is here is that you don't have much of that. So I would take that as very good news. And I thought that was my last slide, but I guess no, I have a couple more, sorry. So this is sodium and chloride levels at Gravelly Pond. Now, interestingly, this is, as you notice, well below the 20, and Gravelly Pond is north of Route 128. So perhaps that might be the difference in terms of major sources of road salts. Maybe not as many in the Gravelly Pond watershed compared to the Lincoln Street well, where we saw the higher concentrations. And this is my last slide. I thought what I would do here, this is kind of interpolated from our report and also from some, thinking that I've done more recently. So I'll just kind of quickly lay this out. This includes some of the more common strategies people have used for water resource protection. I say people, I should say municipalities. The most common one is a zoning overlay district. That was, and these, by the way, some of these things were recommended in the back of our report in 1990. I spoke with Sue Brown today. Thank you again, Sue, for the call. And in fact, the town did adopt an overlay zoning bylaw in response to the report. So that was implemented. I put in parentheses here amendments as maybe a discussion topic, because perhaps it's time to revisit that and just look at what we might have some upgrades. But the fact that you have it on the books is certainly very beneficial. The next bullet, health regulations. I've done a lot of work with boards of health in Massachusetts, and actually been to court as an expert witness several times defending them. And I can kind of say they almost never lose in court defending them, because the authority to adopt local health regulations is very broad. And so this is an area that has a lot of potential to add regulations if you feel, the town feels there are threats that are not controlled. Wetland regulations. I know Manchester has a very active conservation commission. And so maybe some tweaks to your local bylaws and regulations might be beneficial there. I put stormwater retrofits on the list here because most towns, and I think, I can't remember if Nate and I had this conversation or not. I've spoken to several DPW directors from towns in the last couple of days, but many towns are looking seriously at their stormwater systems, because frankly, the way that we designed them 100 years ago, by running pipes, essentially by running pipes from impervious areas to our receiving waters, was, as I say in class, probably the most effective way to get a pollutant from the watershed into the receiving water. It's really very efficient, and unfortunately, it's a big problem. So I suspect Manchester, like many other communities, is in the process of looking at these stormwater discharges and prioritizing where to go and kind of fix them, if you will. And there's a lot of good ideas on how to do that. I put irrigation regs on the list here because when we spoke, I believe the 22 million gallons per month that you're pumping is fairly close to your Water Management Act permit. And I know in my hometown, we are in the same exact situation. And we just recently passed irrigation regulations that require that, or I should say prohibit any new automatic irrigation system from being connected to the drinking water supply. And then we've taken other measures to try to encourage people to move off the public supply system, thereby providing a little more buffer of usable drinking water as opposed to lawn irrigation water. So I just put that on the list as something to at least think about. Wastewater treatment, I missed the parentheses at the end, sorry there. Both on-site septics, because you do have some of those, and municipal. I know this town has been in discussions with the state on their consent order or the amount of wastewater that can go to the municipal treatment facility. But there's also considerations of some very good new technologies that we're working with here down in Cape Cod on upgrading on-site septics to provide much better treatment. And then the last two bullets, monitoring. Obviously, I know you're doing a fair amount of that, but I think that's something that has a lot of merit in going forward, not only to find problems, but also to monitor success and document success with programs. As we spend money, people like to know that the money was well spent and had results. So I think monitoring can be a really good technique to do that. And then lastly, but certainly not leastly at all, is public education. As you mentioned, Steve, at the beginning, it's critical to get the public engaged, because many of the things we're talking about here ultimately are votes, which obviously we need the public for, and or individual behavior, lawn care, for example, septic system maintenance. So there's a lot of important parts to consider under public education. So I will stop there and see if there are questions.
Well, there is
Oh,
one already in chat, which I'll read from Jeff Koshan. The question is, do you know if Gravelly Pond is refilled mostly by pumping from the wells in Round Pond, or is natural infiltration a more significant source?
I'm gonna refer that to Nate. I know that the Round Pond wells do fill it, but I don't know sort of the relative amounts. I think, Nate, are you with us? Yeah, you are. I see your
Yep,
name.
I'm here. Yeah, it's about equal. I was trying to, while you were talking, trying to find the exact reference. But it is very similar. They, work hand in hand, very much so. When we have Round Pond down, you can generally see, a difference in the level of Gravelly Pond. And when we, do have Round Pond, it's very evident that Gravelly Pond comes up quite a bit. Luckily, right now, the pond is full, so the well is off.
Great.
Just a follow-up question to that. Do we have a map of groundwater elevations around Gravelly and Round ponds?
Here, I'll start, Nate. I don't know if you have, but I didn't include that slide, but there is one in the report that shows some groundwater elevations up there, but it's not extensive. But Nate, maybe you know more on that.
I don't know. Not that I have seen.
Okay, there is one limited one in the report, Steve.
Yeah, the evidence from the recent planning board meetings and Concom meetings in Hamilton vis-a-vis a development out there is that nobody has that data, at least not to authoritative level.
Right.
So they don't know what groundwater is doing in that whole area. Good. Other questions? This has been very valuable, Scott. I'm sure there are some other questions on people's minds. Speak up or raise your hand. We're not that big a crowd. John Round.
Scott, I have a question for you. What is the depth of the pumping well at Lincoln Street?
Let me go back and pull that up and see if
Trying to do the math in my head there, and it
sure. Let's see. Oh, there it is. Yeah, I do have a scale. So it looks like, and Nate, again, please jump in here, but it looks like it's at around minus almost 40, and the land elevation is about 20. So I'm going to say 60 feet. I don't have a scale on here, but I'm guessing these are feet.
Yeah, I think it's 58 feet is
pretty
my
good.
recollection. Yep.
Okay.
and the screened area is approximately 10 feet at the bottom of the well,
Correct. Yep.
and it would be cased through the clay zone and sealed at the top and the bottom there.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, and there's seepage coming down. Do you have a sense of by percentage what is seepage from Sawmill Brook and what is from the sand and gravel layer?
There is a modeled estimate in the report, and I'll have to look it up. I don't recall offhand, but we did. I'm trying to remember how we did that. We did run a model. There are also ways to do it using tracers, and even temperature is used sometimes. If you do it, because groundwater stays the same temperature year round, and of course surface water doesn't. So I'll have to look back. I don't remember the number, but it is in our report, and I can get back to you on that.
And you have a sense of what the capture area is around that well based on the high school well and the HWH-2 well?
And Mike, when you say capture area, what do you, 'cause I'm thinking it's the zone 2 area, but
I'm thinking like a cone of influence, how far?
yeah, okay. Well, we would have, that would have been with the modeling. So just looking at this map here, I mean, I can kind of guess it looking at this map, because if you remember, the water table contours up in this area were flowing southeasterly. So
Right.
that would be beyond the cone of influence, but would be natural flow direction. But the lateral, the sides of this would be, primary, especially this one would be based upon the cone of influence. So cone of influence is defined as the area where the water table is drawn down during the pumping. And I mean, roughly it's going to be, it looks, I mean, I can guess from this map just because I see the lines, probably on the order of a 400 or 500 foot radius, just because I'm seeing from the 400-foot radius goes right up against this line here. And this is down gradient, pulling it back up. So I'm guessing it's on that order of around 400 feet. But that's something we could probably pull out of the model if I could get back into the data. I can't remember if that's actually in the report or not. I can look at it.
Great, thank you.
Ron, you had a question?
John's got a question.
Actually, the question was answered by Mike's
Okay.
question about the zone of influence. That was my question.
Right.
You answered.
John, did you have
Thank
another?
Yes, I was, Scott, I was just wondering, are any of the surrounding towns drawing from the watershed areas which we draw our water from?
I remember Nate mentioned something about that, but I'm going to refer to him on this one as well. I think he said something about Hamilton having some supplies up in that area.
Yeah, I think Hamilton has 2 wells that are, let me go to Google Maps here.
School Street Wells? Nate?
Yeah, I think it's those. So they have right near that development as well. That's proposed to go in. You know, theirs are much closer than
Yeah.
Gravelly Pond or Round Pond.
I'll also mention that I believe we found, Steve, you might help me here a little bit. We found some wells up in Cedar Swamp that were
yes.
once operated by the city of Gloucester that are actually in your watershed. Those wells appear to have been decommissioned and are no longer qualified as public water supply wells, but I think the physical wells are still there.
They are. You can walk out to them from Old School Street. Ashley Oaks is actually the resident authority on those,
Yeah.
having researched back to find out how long they were operated and what they drew. But you're right, it was in a drought in the 60s, and pipe hoses were laid along and pipe along 128 to take it up to one of Gloucester's reservoirs. We couldn't find any evidence that they had been formally decommissioned.
Yeah, right,
Of course, they've
right.
been inactive for a long time. One of them appears to be capped, the other isn't. You can't tell. But they're right there. I had one other question about Gravelly, but let me see if I can remember it. Anybody else in the meantime?
I'll jump in if you don't mind, Steve.
Please, Sue.
And mine is a very non-technical, very general question for you, Scott.
Sure.
I know historically, or 15% of a watershed, when 15% of a watershed is impervious, it's kind of been known as the tipping point. Is that still the general rule?
You know, that's a really interesting point. I've always been intrigued by that. That came, I believe that came from the Center for Watershed Protection down in Maryland. And it's actually in a lot of zoning codes and subdivision regulations around the country. I think my take on it is if the stormwater is handled with conventional conveyance, which is, as I described before, pipe to stream kind of thing, then I think 15% is a pretty good guideline. What's been happening for the past several decades, especially in the last 10 and 20 years, is more and more development and redevelopment is infiltrating stormwater on site rather than piping it. And that makes a huge difference. So I think, I mean, the other way to answer the question is I believe with good green infrastructure, in fact, that's the course I'm teaching right now at Tufts, with good green infrastructure, that impervious number can go up and still have protection if it's done correctly.
Thank you.
Great question.
We'll follow the
remembered my-
science then.
I remembered my question, which is, you're doing some work with MECT, and I wonder if you can share what you hope to learn from that, or is it premature?
No, I can certainly share what I can share. We haven't gone too far, but we've been looking at installing a number of wells in the Lincoln Street watershed area, and we're still debating which ones are going to be most helpful. But the thought is to try to better define some of these flow directions that I referred to earlier, fill in the gaps, if you will, from the earlier work. So I believe I've seen some emails recently that suggest that work may go forward pretty soon. And it may move in phases. So we may get some wells in and then add later. But yeah, there are parts of the watershed where, as we were talking before, could use some better definition in terms of flow directions. So that is in the works.
Thanks. I think we need to let you go because I know you have another role as a water commissioner of your own town that you have.
I do. I could take one more question if somebody wants to do that.
Yeah,
I think
Helen.
Helen has her hand up.
Helen is here. Go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, I have a quick question. We have a situation in Hamilton where a subdivision is right outside our watershed, but still in the watershed for our neighbor Essex's water supply. And the Conservation Commission has permitted underground fuel storage, provided it isn't near a wetland. Is that a good idea?
Well, underground fuel storage has come a long way from the 1980s, which is when I first got involved in it, when it was a huge national problem with a lot of leaking underground storage tanks, which of course EPA had to come up with an acronym for, and they called it LUST. That has been largely dealt with through new design and construction for these underground tanks, either double wall, fiberglass, with monitoring systems. So Helen, I think it's still not a great idea to locate these things in primary drinking water suppliers, because as we all know, we can design things, but they can go wrong. So if there's an alternative location, that's probably better. But if not, there is certainly technology that significantly reduces the risk from what it used to be. I don't know the particulars of this one you're referring to, so I can't speak to it, but I think if there's an option to put it outside of a critical protection area, that's beneficial, obviously, because sometimes these things are not monitored. We don't know how long they're going to last, et cetera, et cetera. So, but we're in a much better place than we were a while back on that.
Well, would monitoring be a good idea? I mean, to build that in?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's leak testing methods on these tanks, there's even some remote alarming that can be built into them. So there's a lot of technical fixes that can be included, which is, again, if it's in a water protection area, that's certainly a good idea.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And we're still kind of scratching our heads about why a purely residential development requires underground fuel storage.
Yeah.
Unless they're planning a gas station on site or something. Well, thank you, Scott. This has been marvelous. And I personally, and I hope collectively, this is the beginning of a conversation and a relationship where we tap your expertise and knowledge.
Sure. Well, thanks, Steve. I'm happy to help, and I commend all of you for your good work here. It's great. This is exactly what towns need to be doing. So good luck with your meetings and where you're headed. So thank you again, Steve.
Thanks. See you soon. Enjoy the water, commissioners. So the next item of our agenda is some very quick updates from working teams. We made some suggestions of which team each of us would participate in, and that was those were suggestions only. They were kind of presumptuous that everybody in fact has time and energy to give to these, which I hope you do, but you're already committed to do these regular meetings and process the information that the working teams ultimately generate. But I thought I'd just work through these quickly. And I'll start with the team 5 because it's simple. It's the citizen awareness and engagement, and that Helen, Bethel, and I actually spent some time together on Monday. We had a sit-down meeting with some folks at Gordon, including the new college president there. So I wouldn't characterize that as citizen awareness, but it did lead me to create that draft of a short survey that I hope that most of you have taken a look at. And thanks for the feedback on it. If anybody has more comments about it, it would be really helpful if you could jot them down and email me and Sue Croft, because we've had 4 or 5 brilliant suggestions so far. It's a great way to test drive the thing and make sure it's ready to meet the public. Also, we could use some suggestions about how to create interest and awareness and attract people to it. I had just put in the tried and true way of a bribe, prize draw for some valuable things. And I think it might be best, several people suggested it might be best if we made those things gift certificates for local businesses, which would be marvelous. So if anybody runs a local business or has a relative or close friend who runs a local business, please inquire in the next 24 hours if you can about whether anybody's interested in doing that at a restaurant or a retailer. I believe we'd be happy to at least cover the cost of a gift certificate, whatever that is, so that there's no out-of-pocket cost to the restaurant or retailer. But of course, a donation is always welcome too. Sue, is there anything you wanted to add about the survey?
Nothing I can think of, no. I think the feedback that we got from everybody was really, really useful. They definitely tore it apart more than I did. So as far as digging in there and seeing what's working and what's not working, it was really good feedback.
Yeah, I tested myself with as much skip logic and bridging and jumping in the thing as I could. And that, of course, creates all kinds of potential problems. So you found most of them. I hope you found all of them. Let's move to quality and contaminants, which tentatively had, I think, both Jessica and Francie on it, and maybe Ron as well. Is that right?
Gordon Turner, Lynn
Gordon,
Atkinson,
Racking
and
my memory here.
yeah, and Randy Augustine. I think Randy.
Randy is here.
So we have had a couple of emails, but we haven't done anything official yet. I think we felt that this meeting today might help guide us a little bit, but we don't have anything to report on yet.
Okay, thanks for the update. And I know, Randy, you circulated a webinar or workshop on contaminants that some or all of you might want to attend. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's it's through the Boston Globe. It's a free event, about an hour, during lunchtime.
And I only forwarded it to the contaminants group. If anybody else wants to get that link, just shoot me an email and I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Is it focused on PFAS or is it more general contaminants?
It's focused on PFAS, but there's a variety of people that'll be speaking. It looks like some citizens groups, and it looks like it probably would have some very interesting information.
We also have a working team on effects of climate change, which tentatively included Mike Carvalho, Anne, I think, Harrison, yes. And maybe that's where Ron is. Forgive my memory here. Well, one Ron or another.
It's Ron. 2 Rons don't make it right.
Oof. I walked right into that, didn't I? Anything to report on climate change? Almost impossible to summarize anything on that subject.
Climate is changing and we're still collecting the data, but this was very helpful.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is really a starting point.
It would be interesting to note if any of the sodium chloride levels are related to saltwater intrusion. That was part of the reason for the question about the capture area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one thing that we want to start looking at a bit more, because they've been, as we've been testing over the last, few months, especially with PFAS, they fluctuate quite a bit. We kind of attributed maybe some of the higher levels with dust control at the elementary school project. They are back down from kind of the elevated level that Scott had noted. We just had a result come in today, and it's down quite a bit. It's still elevated, but it's not as high as it was. So definitely something I think would be good to look into.
Interesting. Thanks.
And then based on what I heard about feet per minute or feet per day, short term, I would think the pool would be kind of a short term. Well, that wouldn't really impact things as far as measuring goes, whether or not the school project finished 3 months ago or 6 months ago. I don't know, just a thought.
That's possible. Well, it might depend on whether we're talking about drawing down from Sawmill Brook or actually out of the aquifer itself.
Yeah, and again, the school wouldn't affect Sawmill Brook draw, I don't think.
Depends on
Maybe.
the wind direction if it's dust, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Supply and sources, so that was much of what we covered today. That has yep, Ashley, Ron, Mastro Giacomo, Joe Sabella, Fred Wales. You folks have put your heads together yet?
We have been communicating. So I think I'll help coordinate with Ashley, and we'll take it from there. Been in touch with Ashley, and she's got some family obligations, but I think she'll be helping out.
Yeah, she did tell me that she had finished a consulting assignment late last week, and she's eager to dive into this, consistent with having 4 small kids and a few other obligations. Usage and demand.
Steve, can I ask a quick question? It seemed like for a lot of the working groups, part of the thing was kind of what's changed from the 1990 report till now. I mean, do we have anywhere like, and I maybe could start it and I haven't, like what the recommendations were in 1990, and I think he's touched on a little today, which ones have been done, sort of which ones maybe aren't, because if those are applicable to many of the groups, it seems like having that done in one place that everyone's working from. Sort of just a knowledge base of what the recommendations were, which ones have been done, which ones maybe are still relevant or not, and kind of something that we could all be working from the same place.
Yep, I think that's an excellent suggestion. It was a little too much to ask for Scott to do that in the first session. But between maybe you and I, Sue, can spearhead that, picking probably Nate and Chuck's brains about some of the things that we don't know that well, and see if we can get that out. It's a lengthy section of the report, maybe around 60 pages toward the end of the report. So there's a lot of recommendations, right down to proposed new language for bylaws and for regulations and things like that. But a really good idea for us to do. Let's put that on our Steve and Sue to-do list.
Got it.
On the usage and demand for drinking water, I have Jeff Koshan and myself at the moment. We're going to need obviously some other volunteers to help us with that. And for myself, I haven't done anything other than think about the fluctuation in the summertime and what that implies. I know somebody here already did some quantitative work. Gordon, was that you on? Forgive me, I don't remember, on the usage statistics we've been furnished, which are comprehensive, household by household.
Sue sent me the data from last year, and I was just able to look at the distribution of use by household, just to see kind of what the average use is, where the outliers are, things like that. So I can share that with your subcommittee.
I can almost hear what you're saying. I don't know if other people have having trouble as well.
Presenting here
But
at a future meeting or something.
I think you may be a little frozen on my screen. So I'll follow up with you. In fact, it might be a good idea for Sue and I to try to connect with each of the working teams in the next week. The final one is Town Responsibilities Authority and Accountability, and that is Tom Keogh, John Round, and Mr. Colarusso.
We are meeting next Monday.
Super. Yeah, I think spade work on that one is going to pay off in the long term, big time. Good. So we mentioned the engagement survey. I gave very brief mention to our meeting with the new president of Gordon College. That is thanks to Joe Sabella, who on his own initiative set this up. It turns out Joe is an alum of Gordon, although he confessed he was there for one semester only, and I think it had to do with chasing some girl. But his wife, in fact, is a graduate of Gordon, so we were safe on those terms. We really started a conversation, and our goal was to resume discussion, which Helen had maybe 25 years ago. David Lumsden and I had almost 7 or 8 years ago. Joe has been having off and on, and we succeeded at that. We got a contact of the head of marketing and community relations to continue some discussions and at least general agreement that it makes sense for Gordon to be involved at some stage in the regional aspects of this problem, in that they own a fair amount of land that's in our watershed as well as other towns. And they have their own designs on using that land, which they weren't really disclosing to us at this stage. Okay, we also have scheduled a tour, and that is Wednesday, the 30th, from 3 to 5 p.m. Tom Kehoe, you made an excellent suggestion that we might want to meet in town, say behind Town Hall, and assuming pandemic safety, that we carpool out to the site. Partly because not everybody will know how to get there and park, and partly because the road is a little rough for the last half mile. So if that makes sense to people, you can certainly find your way there on your own. I don't think parking is a problem out there, but Tom, is it in your experience?
Well, no, well, not at the water treatment plant, but depending on where you want to go. If you're going to go to the Round Pond pump station, that would be a problem, especially if you wind up with 21 people and 21 cars.
Yeah, no, that'll clog up Tobacco Road big time.
Yeah.
So can we suggest we meet at 2:30 to 2:45 behind Town Hall, and we have a suggestion online here, real time, that we meet from the high school. We can walk to the well and then carpool out to Gravelly. That makes some sense, although I think we're starting at Gravelly for some good reason. Is that right, Nate?
I thought we were starting at the well.
That's what I thought.
At Lincoln Street, yeah.
Excellent. I stand corrected. Let's meet at high school. There should be plenty of parking by 2:45, right?
You could even park at the at home station, which is to the right of the football field there.
Yep. It's a clever name, home station. Okay, and then we'll figure out carpooling to go from the well to the site. Sue, you want to have us vote on the minutes from March 2?
Yes, please. I move that we vote to pass the minutes from the last meeting we had.
Are there any suggested changes or edits?
Any that I was given online, I've incorporated, but there wasn't a whole lot of changes.
Excellent. All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Anne. All those in favor indicate by raising your hand or shaking your head or clicking your hand. Good, I am seeing a clear majority. All those opposed? make a noise or raise a hand. Good, it's unanimous. Thank you. Any other items not anticipated when we made the agenda?
Would it be possible to bring interested friends on the tour of the on the
Excellent
30th?
question. Nate, I think the governing factor here is how many people can crowd into the treatment plant. What's your advice about that?
Yeah, we could probably accommodate a few more people. The Lincoln Street well is certainly the smallest, but I think we can do groups kind of in and out. It's not, a lot to see. It's just generally one room in each of the buildings. And then the treatment plant, much larger. So yeah, we can probably accommodate that.
All right, shall we put a upper limit of something on it, 20 or 30, just so in case we get an outpouring of interested citizens, we can.
Yeah, we could do 30, and I mean, I imagine we can probably split into two groups if really necessary. We can have each of the treatment plant guys lead one with me and Chuck going with each group.
Okay, well, it occurs to me if we field this this survey, invite people to take it, we can also publicize the tour with the limit of 30 people for the first round and ask them to sign up.
Yeah, I mean, if there's more, interest out there, we're certainly can do additional tours at a later date.
Yep, we could even sell souvenirs.
Yeah.
Mike, you had a question? No. Well done. All right, last call. Any other points this body should consider on March 16? I'll hear Fred, yes.
Yes, now, if we're meeting at the Lincoln Street well, do we still meet at 2:30 to 2:35?
No, I think we could start there at 3. We can figure out the carpools after the well visit. Good point.
Right. And
no need to come early.
And do we want to walk from the filtration plant to the Round Pond well?
No, that's it's a pretty long.
It's pretty good.
I think it's about a mile, maybe.
Half-hour hoof.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do it, but I don't want to hold up Nate and Chuck and whoever else is doing it. I think maybe we'll postpone that for an actual walk around.
It'd be a good idea to walk the whole gravelly pond and see that.
I agree. Yeah.
So you can see the recharge area.
Yep, and the weather is going to be in our favor in the next 6 weeks, so we'll make that our next group outing. And there we can bring along kind of everybody and their dog. Okay, may I hear that famous final motion?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. Second?
Second.
Second.
Are no objections? Properly moved and seconded. We'll circulate dates for the next meeting, but I presume it's going to be, we'll go to the month interval with the tour in between. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Steve.